So today we have a video from Prager University on climate change and the Paris Agreement, which has been a pretty hot topic after President Trump made the decision to separate the country from this nearly globally agreed upon accord. So I decided it would be nice to help prevent the flow of misinformation on this subject, especially from this joke of an establishment. Without further ado, let's get into the video.
Much has been made of the Paris Climate Agreement, signed by the leaders of 178 countries in 2016. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius, speaking for many, called it a historic turning point. The head of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Gina McCarthy, echoed the minister's remark when she testified before the House Committee on Science, Space and Technology. The Paris Agreement was, she said, an incredible achievement. But when pressed by committee members to explain exactly how much this treaty would reduce global temperatures, she would not, or could not, say.
Now I have found a video of Gina McCarthy's testimony that he refers to. I could not personally find where she was questioned on global temperature increase or reduction, but I will link it in the description if anyone wants to look for it. Anyways, this question would have been impossible if not extremely difficult to answer, because at the time the agreement wasn't signed and not every country had set their climate change reduction goals, meaning we didn't know what the rest of the world had planned to do to reduce CO2 emissions.
This combination of grand pronouncements and vague specifics is a good strategy for Paris Agreement fans to take, because the agreement will cost a fortune but do little to reduce global warming.
First of all, the Paris Agreement is designed specifically so countries set their own goals and spend exactly as much money on their goal as they want to, and there is no punishment for not achieving it. He's about to get into the statistics, so I want to take this time to remind everybody where this information is coming from. The co-founder of Prager University, Dennis Prager, has been quoted saying climate change is hysteria, like in this clip from a debate between him and Christopher Hitchens.
Today, I believe that the hysteria over global warming is indeed hysteria. You are far more likely to believe that hysteria if you are secular.
Are you retarded?
Oh yeah, the process that can literally turn the Earth into an uninhabitable toaster oven of a planet is just hysteria, nothing to worry about at all.
World on fire.
So clearly fucking Mr. Bjorn here is not using the most reliable or trustworthy outlet he could be to tell us about climate change.
Consider the Obama administration's signature climate policy, the Clean Power Plan. Using the same climate prediction model that the UN uses, I found that the power plan will accomplish almost nothing. Even if its cuts to carbon dioxide emissions are fully implemented, not just for the 14 years that the Paris Agreement lasts, but for the rest of the century, the Clean Power Plan would reduce the temperature increase in 2100 by just 0.023 degrees Fahrenheit. The president has made further and grander promises of future US carbon cuts, but these are only vaguely outlined. In the unlikely event that all of these extra cuts also happen and are adhered to throughout the rest of the century, the combined reduction in temperatures would be 0.057 degrees. To put it another way, if the US delivers for the whole century on the president's very ambitious rhetoric, it would postpone global warming by about 8 months at the end of the century. Now, let's add in the rest of the world's Paris promises. If we generously assume that the promised carbon cuts for 2030 are not only met, which itself would be a UN first, but sustained throughout the rest of the century, temperatures in 2100 would drop by 0.3 degrees, the equivalent of postponing warming by less than 4 years. Again, that's using the UN's own climate prediction model.
So he is right, but its effectiveness isn't why the Paris Agreement is a good thing. That isn't what makes the agreement a historic turning point. It's about the nations of the world recognizing a problem and coming together to solve it, which is what makes it a historic turning point. All this proves is that we need to take more drastic measures to reverse our damage, and the Paris Agreement is the pathway forward.
But here's the biggest problem. These minuscule benefits do not come free. Quite the contrary. The cost of the Paris Climate Pact is likely to run to $1 to $2 trillion every year based on estimates produced by the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum and the Asia Modeling Exercise. In other words, we will spend at least $100 trillion in order to reduce the temperature by the end of the century by a grand total of 0.3 of 1 degree.
Now this is a chart of discretionary spending for 2015. As you can see, there is an elephant in the room. America spent the majority of $1.11 trillion on the military and then spent a meager 6% between science, energy, and environmental endeavors. If we can spend nearly $600 billion on something destructive to the planet, then we can spend more than the pathetic amount we do to try and reverse the damage. Saving the planet is something that should be more important.
Some Paris Agreement supporters defend it by claiming that its real impact on temperatures will be much more significant than the UN model predicts. But this requires mental gymnastics and heroic assumptions. The Climate Action Tracker, widely cited by Paris Agreement fans, predict a temperature reduction of 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. But this prediction is based very heavily on the assumption that even stronger climate policies will be adopted in the future. Actually, 98% of the assumed reductions will come only after 2030, which is what the current Paris Agreement covers.
So within the agreement it specifies that nations should amplify their efforts to reduce climate change and set higher goals, as well as there is an assessment of reductions every few years. So there will certainly be increases in our efforts, so it's not as assumed as Bjorn makes it out to be. I'll leave a link to the United Nations climate change site so you can look into it more thoroughly than I have time for or than Bjorn is willing to.
And even such wishful thinking won't achieve anything close to the 2 degrees Celsius reduction that has become the somewhat arbitrary but widely adopted benchmark to avoid the worst effects of global warming. The actual promised emission reductions under the Paris Agreement literally gets us just 1% of the way to the 2 degrees target. 99% of what would be required is put off until after 2030. The Paris Agreement is the wrong solution to a real problem.
I've already covered this part. He is kinda just feeding us more reasons to invest more heavily in carbon reduction and clean energy resources.
The right solution will most likely be found through green energy research and development, like that promoted by Bill Gates and the Breakthrough Coalition. Mr. Gates has announced that private investors are committing $7 billion for clean energy R&D.
Right here is intentionally misleading. It's fucking disgusting and exactly what I expected to see from Prager University. He purposely mentions Bill Gates, who did make the Breakthrough Coalition to find real zero-carbon clean energy solutions. He purposely mentions him to make you think he supports the non-clean energy resource that Bjorn is about to mention.
Instead of political hot air and ever larger government subsidies of today's inefficient green technologies, those who want to combat climate change should focus on dramatically boosting green energy innovation. The US already shows the way. With its pursuit of fracking, making it safer and more efficient every year,
Oh, there it is. There it is.
America has drastically reduced the cost of natural gas. This momentous switch from coal to lower CO2 gas as a source of energy has done far more to drive down carbon dioxide emissions than any recent government climate policy. Turns out that those politicians who gathered in Paris, France, could learn a lot from Paris, Texas.
After telling you all this crap and intentionally misleading you, fracking the non-clean energy solutions that not only pollutes us with greenhouse gases but destroys homes and poisons water supplies is his miracle solution. But you might be asking, why would he lie? Why would he tell us these things that would lead to environmental destruction? Well, it's because Prager University was paid by fracking companies to do it. It's sad to see an organization spewing misinformation like this, trying to manipulate people and at the cost of our environment. Plus, in the case of fracking, your home health and the health of generations to come. Thank you to everyone who took the time to watch my video and criticism of Prager University's Paris Agreement video. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. All relevant links should be in the description, including some sources and my Patreon. Constructive criticism is always welcome in the comments below. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your 24-hour period.